Welcome any newcomers to our next presentation in the Multisession Forest Invasive Species webinar. If you're new to Zoom, please look at the bottom of your screen. You can use the chat function to send technology questions or technology issues to the panelists, and we can help you work through those. If you have questions during a presentation or to a presenter during their presentation, please try and use the Q&A option. If you're on Facebook Live, you can use comments. Josh Benish is helping us facilitate the meeting, and he'll type in questions from Facebook Live so we can answer those as well. This webinar is organized by the Central Wisconsin Invasives Partnership, or CWIP for short. We are a cooperative invasive species group. We focus on terrestrial invasive species issues, mostly education, mapping, and control. And we serve 7 counties in central Wisconsin. You can see on our slide there where those counties are located. But we're not the only cooperative invasive species group. They're all over the place, and in Wisconsin, we have pretty good coverage of different cooperative invasive species groups. You can see that on the map on my slide. I recommend getting connected with your local cooperative invasive species group. These groups focus on different initiatives, kind of a variety of different projects, but they're always available as a resource for landowners and for interested folks. So for more information and to learn about your local cooperative invasive species group, please visit the link for the IPAW page on SISMAs. Another thing that I'd like to share with all of you is that there's an upcoming educational event called the Upper Midwest Invasive Species Conference, or UMISC. This will be held from November 2nd to the 6th, so it is a full week of presentations on all kinds of different invasive species topics, from aquatics to terrestrials, prairie plants, forest plants, focusing on prevention, mapping, control. There's really a huge diversity of presentations, and all people are encouraged to attend if you're interested in invasive plants, whether you're a landowner, professional working for DNR, whether you're a student. There are student rates available too. And since this conference is being held online, the registration fees are less than they would be if there was an in-person conference being held. Additionally, if you're just interested in woody invasive plant presentations, you can sign up for the Woody Invasives of the Great Lakes Summit, which is just Thursday and Friday. And if you sign up for this, you won't get presentations from the rest of the conference, but you'll get plenty of content on woody invasive species, and that will be free if you just sign up for the Woody Invasive Summit and not the rest of the conference. For more information on that, you can visit woodyinvasives.org, and there should be more information there. So our next presentation is going to be from Ann Pierce from UW Extension and the Wisconsin Forest Detector Network. She's going to talk about mapping and monitoring invasive plants. So yeah, take it away, Ann. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Great, thanks, Asa. So it'll just take a minute to pull up my screen now. So a lot of today's workshop is going to be focused on identifying invasive plants. So this is kind of a short break to talk about the importance of mapping invasive plants. And I'll be talking specifically about mapping with an app called the Great Lakes Early Detection Network app. So briefly, just to introduce myself, I'm Ann Pierce, and I coordinate the Wisconsin Forest Detector Network, and we are a statewide program that focuses on invasive species education, but we also are a citizen science program. So we train volunteers and land managers and landowners, like those of you on the webinar today, to identify species in your area of the state and then map them and report them using the Glidden app. And so I'm going to start out by just talking a little bit about why it's important to map invasive species, both from the perspective, kind of statewide perspective with WISTIPP, the Forest Detector Network, or DNR's perspective, but also at a particular property level. So if you're a property owner, why might it be important to map invasive species on your own property? So I like to start out by showing this curve, which we call the invasion curve. And so going from the bottom to the top, that denotes the area infested by an invasive species. And then going from left to right, that shows time. And so the curve basically illustrates kind of the typical pattern that we see when invasive species arrive in a new area. And so once a species arrives, obviously if it's brand new to the area, it's not going to infest a large area or a large amount of acreage at the outset. And then it starts growing kind of slowly. And once the area infested starts to increase somewhat rapidly, that's usually when we actually notice that that species has arrived or that there might be a problem, because we notice maybe a species that we didn't even see 5 years ago all of a sudden seems to be taking over a pretty large area of our land. And then typically with invasive species, the public generally doesn't become aware of these infestations until they've really, really rapidly expanded so that it would be impossible not to notice it. But of course that means, if you look at the right side, that we're already at the point where our control costs are out of control, quite literally. So one of the issues with invasive species is it often has to become this really obvious problem for us to notice it. But by that time, the amount of time and resources and human power we would need to actually effectively control that infestation is just too much for us to be able to do that. And so one of the reasons that the FIRST Detector Network exists and that we encourage people to learn about invasive plants and report them when they find them is that's ultimately going to help us move this point of detecting a new infestation much earlier on in the process, where it's a much smaller area that's been infested, which means that our control costs in terms of the financial cost and the time involved are much, much lower. And that gives us a much better chance of actually eradicating that infestation before it becomes too big to handle. So from a statewide perspective, we're interested in having people kind of understand what are the new species, which Kelly will be talking about later. So we have more eyes on the ground to detect those earlier so we can more effectively control them. But this is true on your property as well. Maybe some of those more common species that Asa just presented aren't on your property. Like maybe you don't have barberry yet. But now that you've become familiar with it, it's a good idea to keep an eye out for it and then try to detect it early on so that you can deal with it before it becomes a huge problem. Another thing from a statewide perspective in terms of mapping is we just like to kind of keep track of the distribution of invasive species so we can kind of see what they're up to. It helps us from a statewide level know what resources we might be able to offer to people around the state to help them deal with infestations. But regionally, I mean, we're working with states all around us. And so, I mean, typically in Wisconsin, we're looking down towards Illinois to see what might be coming our way. And here in Wisconsin, if we're doing a good job of tracking our invasive plant distributions, then our neighbors over in Minnesota might get a good chance to prepare for what's coming their way. So as an example, this map is showing our known, I guess, positively identified records or confirmed records of Japanese barberry back in 2009. But after more outreach efforts on barberry and I think teaching more people about its association with ticks and why we want to make sure we're dealing with it in our woodlands, people started mapping it more, and so now we can see that it's definitely much more widespread across the state than maybe we would have recognized in 2009. And so Asa already talked about barberry. I mean, here it is growing in a nice landscaped setting, but birds eat the fruits, and when it ends up in forests, it creates really nasty thickets, spiny thickets. And Asa mentioned this, but I'll just reiterate that these infestations in forests of barberry have been associated with higher densities of deer ticks that are infected with Lyme disease. And so for things like barberry and wild parsnip that have a real human health concern, that's kind of an extra reason to keep track of the distribution so that we can make efforts to prevent them from spreading further and track where we might have greater public health concerns with some of these invasive plants. And then finally, I like to put mapping in the context of kind of overall steps that you might consider when you're managing invasive species. And again, these 5 steps apply, in your backyard as much as they apply to 1,000 acres of a property or even the entire state. But the steps that we like to consider is number 1, identify what plants you have, and that includes both the invasive ones and the native plants or plants that you want to protect. Number 2 is understanding your plant population. Number 3, research and select the best techniques for the species that you want to manage. Asa mentioned this earlier, but again, I'll reiterate that the management of invasive plants is very species specific. So it's not a one size fits all approach. So you really do need to figure out what's going to be most effective in your situation. Number 4, apply those management techniques. And number 5, do the follow-up monitoring and treatment. So where does mapping fit into this? We're really talking about that step 2 of understanding the plant population. So getting a sense of where are especially the invasive plants that you need to manage and how large are those infestations. And so I think I saw that maybe a question popped up. Okay, and this is a purple loosestrife control question, so we'll hold on to that for now and we can answer it at the end. But with all that in mind, in terms of why we want to map invasive species or report them, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how you can actually do that using some of the tools we use with our first detector network. So first of all, our website, which is shown on the screen, we have resources here. If you go to the right side of our homepage, you can click on this link that says, I want to report invasive species. And then we have if you want the really every detail possible, we've got this handbook called Monitoring Invasive Plants in Wisconsin. There's also video tutorials for using the app and web-based tools that we have for reporting. In any case, no matter what tools you use to report invasive plants or who you're reporting them to, the 4 key pieces of information would be the species name or what you think it is, the date that you saw it, the exact location that you saw it. So GPS coordinates are the best, but if you can give an address or a description from road intersections, that can be helpful too. And then pictures of the plants that you found. So whether you're reporting to Asa and her team with Central Wisconsin Invasives Partnership, or you're reporting to Kelly at DNR, or you're reporting to me at the First Detector Network, all of this information helps us confirm the identification of the plant that you're dealing with. And if you're looking then for assistance in figuring out how to control those plants, that's going to give us the information we need to start giving recommendations. And so from the First Detector Network's perspective, if you're joining us kind of from a citizen science perspective or working with your local parks, there's 3 different ways that you can report. So there's a website called EDDMapS, which I'll talk about briefly. There's that Great Lakes Early Detection Network app, or you can email reports directly to me using this email address. Now, I recognize that I'm using the word report a lot, and you might be like, well, why do I want to report things to you, Anne, at the First Detector Network or to the DNR? And I want to back up and say that the tools that we're sharing today, this EDDMapS website and the Glidden app, they're very beneficial for a couple of reasons. One is that they're pretty easy to use, and so if you report that information to us, we can use that information to help invasive species efforts statewide. But at the same time, more importantly for you, is that you can access that data and produce your own maps on your property pretty easily of what you found on your property. So it's a great way to kind of deal with 2 aspects of this at once, help out the statewide efforts in terms of tracking and managing invasive plants, but also using the tools to your own benefit to better track the plants on your property. So the EDDMapS website is basically the database that holds all of these records from the tools. It's also a great website to look up information profiles on any of the invasive species you would find in Wisconsin, but it's a national database. And so if you are traveling somewhere or you have family in some other region of the country, you can look up invasive species, including plants and animals and plant diseases, look up that information on the website. They've got some really great pictures on there of the species. The other features I'll talk about on EDDMapS today, or spend more time on, is how you can use it to report observations and then manage your reports, which includes how you could access that information that you've mapped to use on your own property. So this is what the EDDMapS website looks like. We're just going to do a screenshots of this for now, but there is a tutorial video for this on our First Detector Network website as well. And so when you access the website, if you wanted to report or map invasive species, you would go to this Report Sightings tab on the menu at the top. And then this is what the reporting form looks like online. And so the fields or categories that you need to fill out are highlighted in red. So the pest name or the species name, the date that you saw it. You'll notice that there are several other fields of information that you can fill out, including how big is the area that's infested, what habitat is it in. Canopy closure in this case means what's like the percent cover of that species. And so if you really want to get into tracking this information for your own property or a property that you volunteer at, you can really pack a lot of information into these reports. The other part of the reporting form includes mapping the location. And so you can select your state and county. And then the map itself is just based on a Google Maps satellite view. And so you can zoom in, you know, if you've ever played around on Google Maps, you can zoom in as far as you would be able to on that and get that really detailed picture of the property you're on. And you can place up at the top of the map box itself, there's these 4 little tools, the hand grabber, the single marker, the line, and the polygon. So you can place a point to denote a small infestation, or you could use a line, for instance, if you were marking like an infestation of wild parsnip along a roadside, or if you've got a big infestation, maybe you've got a bunch of buckthorn, doesn't make sense to map individual plants, you could use this polygon option and actually just draw the boundaries of that infestation. And then I guess I'll back up. I didn't show at the bottom of the form, there's a place to attach pictures here, and then you can submit that report. So the other piece of EDDMapS that I want to share is this My EDDMapS option, which is at the upper right corner of the menu at the top of the screen. And if you use either this EDDMapS website to map invasive species or the Gledin app, this is where you'll go to access your records and make any changes you would need to. So when you click on My EDDMapS, you'll see this dashboard, and then the menu on the left, if you click on reports, that's going to give you the list of all the reports that you've ever submitted, either through the app or through the website. And so you can see a part of my list here. If you, for instance, submitted a report, but you hadn't gotten a chance to add a picture to it yet, you could find that report in this list and go to the right side and click on Edit to update that report. If you made a report of something that you thought was honeysuckle, but then you realized later it wasn't honeysuckle and it's not an invasive, you could delete the report from here. The other thing that you can do from this My EDDMapS dashboard on the left side menu, you can download your records. And so you can do downloads where you can, if you're an ArcGIS user, you can download it and make a fancy map on GIS, or you can just download the records into like a Google Earth file. So you don't have to be a GIS wizard. You can download that, open up Google Earth, and see where you've mapped those plants on your property. So the website is great and there's a lot of information there, but really the tool that we expect most people to use is the Gledin app, because Websites are pretty clunky to use in the field or out on if you're out walking your land, but the app works really nicely to let you map a lot of invasive species easily from the field and then upload that information to the EDDMapS website later and access that as you need it. And so I am going to switch over and hopefully I'm going to try to do a live demonstration of the app here. So give me just a second. Playing with technology is always fun. All right, so I'm going to just reshare my screen. And now you should see the Glidden app pulled up on the screen. And I will say, I noticed a question from Judy, and Judy's wondering if these reporting tools are just for terrestrial invasives or if they're also for aquatics. So the tools that I'm sharing today, you can use for any invasive species. Here in Wisconsin, we have a slightly different systems kind of at the state level for reporting terrestrial species versus aquatic species. But if you map or report using any of these tools, all of the reports that come in through the app or through the EDDMapS website get verified by people like Asa and myself. And so basically you don't need to worry about where the report's supposed to go. If it comes through this system, we'll make sure that the reports go where they need to go if it's aquatic or terrestrial. Great question. So this Great Lakes Early Detection Network app is connected to that EDDMapS database. It's basically just the app that lets you feed information directly into that database without having to access a website. And it's called Great Lakes Early Detection Network because the app includes species that you'll find here in the Upper Great Lakes region. They being the people at EDDMapS, have also developed these reporting apps for other regions of the country. So I want to show a couple features of the app before I show you how you can actually map with it. And I'm going to start by selecting this all species option. And so this shows every species that's in the app. And again, this includes plants and animals, terrestrial, aquatic, plant diseases. And you can see as I scroll down the list, there are many, many, many species here. But one thing I wanted to point out is to the right of each species name, we'll pick on Canada thistle here, about halfway down the screen. There's this blue information icon. And so if you select that, you'll see that there's a built-in field guide in this app. So if you're relatively new to invasive plants in general, or maybe some of the species that Kelly will talk about later are new to you, this is kind of handy to have the guide in your pocket if it's on your phone. And so there's pictures here, and then at the lower center part of the screen, you can click on that info tab, and it gives you the written description of the species. And also at the bottom of that, why it's an ecological threat. So if you're not sure why something might be considered invasive from that ecological perspective, this is a handy resource as well. Now to actually make a report, I'm going to back out to our main menu. You just need to find the species that you think you've got. And so you can use this species categories option if you'd like. We mentioned all species, which is what we just saw. Or the third option is you can create a custom species list. And so I'm going to go back to all species, and I'm going to pick the field guide for Amur silvergrass. And so if you see on the upper right-hand corner of the screen, it says add to my list. So if I select that, then Amur silvergrass is now in my custom species list. Now, the one reason why you might want to use this My Species list is because you could, if you're only mapping a handful of different species, or maybe you only know how to identify a handful of species, you can make that short list of species right here. And mine's not particularly short because I map plants all over the state, you know, you can put just 5 or 10 species in there, and it's easier to find them then when you're mapping in the field. Or if you start with the all species list, you can also, instead of scrolling through this list, you can use this search box. And I'm going to just type in honeysuckles. And you'll see that several options show up. So we have 4 different bush honeysuckles that are invasive in the state of Wisconsin. So the amur, the moros, the showy fly honeysuckle, and Tartarian honeysuckle are our 4 invasive bush honeysuckles. Japanese honeysuckle is a vine, which is a regulated plant in Wisconsin, but it hasn't been found in Wisconsin yet. But I wanted to call your attention to this other option called non-native bush honeysuckles. So the bush honeysuckles can be very difficult to tell apart from each other. So instead of like ripping your hair out trying to figure out, oh, is this the showy fly honeysuckle or is it Moro's honeysuckle? I'm not sure. You can just map it using this non-native bush honeysuckles option. So I'm saying I've found some honeysuckle on my land. I want to map it, so I've selected that species. And now you can see the reporting form on the app. It's a slimmed down version of what you would see on that EDDMapS website, but it automatically fills in the common and scientific name for you, the date and time that you've made that report, and then you can take pictures directly in the app. And so when you select that camera icon, if you happen to have a picture of that plant that you're looking at already in your photo library, you can select that. Or what most people do is they just say, take a picture. And I don't have honeysuckle in my house, but you'll get a picture of my wall. When you take the picture, at the bottom left corner, you have the option of retaking it, or the bottom right corner, you can use that picture. So a reminder, people like Asa and I are reviewing these reports and trying to determine whether you have the correct identification. So if it's a really blurry picture, we would encourage you to retake it. Otherwise, you can use that picture. And if you wanted to take multiple pictures so you can show like the whole plant and then close-up pictures of flowers or fruits or leaves, you would just tap on the camera icon and do the same thing. Next up is the location, and you'll see that the app automatically records the GPS location for you. So that's great. Like, you don't have to spend a lot of time writing this down or like getting out a separate GPS unit to write down the coordinates. You can also tap on that map icon and it will show you where it thinks you are. And so right now it's showing me that I'm close to my backyard, which is accurate. But the great thing about being able to open this map is you can correct for any GPS errors. So let's say I am hypothetically standing on one side of a river and I see that invasive plant across the river, but I have no way to get across the river to mark that location accurately. And for this example, we'll just pretend that the river is the other side of my yard. So I can just tap on the screen and a blue dot will show up that shows where that infestation actually is. So thinking about this from a management perspective, you want to be able to map that as accurately as possible. The other thing you can do, just like with the online form, is you can draw a polygon. So at the bottom center, I can switch to polygon mode, and then I can just tap the corners wherever the boundary of that infestation is. So honeysuckle is taking over a couple yards worth of space in our neighborhood. But you'll notice when you draw that polygon, now at the top of the screen, it estimates that area of the infestation for you. So again, from a management perspective, knowing that you have, 0.14 acres of honeysuckle is going to give you much better information than if I just dropped a point and you wouldn't be sure if it was just one honeysuckle or a big infestation. Knowing how much you have really helps you plan your management. So once I've done that, the next thing down is time spent in minutes. People usually just leave that at 5 minutes. Status is a little confusing, but the default is positive, and positive means that you have seen that plant, it is there. If you were managing it, you could switch it to treated. And then negative would be if you were spending time looking for this species, but you didn't find it, you could mark it as a negative report. So maybe with some of the species that Kelly will talk about later, are less common species, if you spend time walking your property, or you're working for or volunteering for a park and you look for, say, Amur cork tree on those properties and you don't find it, you could use this to say, hey, I looked here on this date and didn't see it. And then because the information from the app and the website is easy to share, other people who also work on that property will easily be able to see that it's already been checked this year and that they don't need to do the same thing. The next section is this infestation information. You can fill in as much as you want about the type of habitat you found it in. The area, like I said, since I drew a polygon, has already been calculated, and then the density. So honeysuckle here in the Madison area where I am is usually quite dense when we find it. So I'll put that it's over 25%. And then you save your report. If you didn't take a picture, it will remind you to do so. And now I'll just show you the kind of last critical piece of using the app, which is that once you've made a report, your upload queue, which is about halfway down this menu, will have a red box with a number there, and that just shows you the reports that you have. And so I'm showing the Apple version of the app right now. The Android version is a little bit different, but if I want to actually get these reports off my device so that they can be used by people that access the EDDMapS database, or so that I could get that information into a map, I'll select Actions, and then I'm going to upload this Tree of Heaven report and this invasive knotweed report because those are real reports. I'm going to leave the bush honeysuckle one there that I just made because that was obviously a fake or practice report. So once I've selected those, I'll hit upload at the bottom of the screen. And it doesn't look like anything's happening at first, but then it gives you this message when your upload is done. And then I'm just going to delete this record out of here because it's a fake one. So that is the Glidden app in a very accelerated version. I'm just going to check the chat box because it looks like, okay, people are still asking about controlling plants, which always brings a lot of questions. And I know we'll share resources on that later. So right now obviously you can keep typing questions if you have them about the app or the website or how you might get this information to use it on your property. I'm just going to hop back to my presentation really quickly to share a couple more resources that you might find interesting. And so with the citizen science data that we've found, or that our volunteers have submitted, and then other information that we've gotten from DNR and out of that EDDMapS website, we've created some online tools, one of which is this WISTIPP viewer map. And I apologize for the number of acronyms we're throwing around today, but WISTIPP just stands for Wisconsin Shared Terrestrial Invasive Plant Presence Viewer. So it's basically all of our confirmed terrestrial invasive plant records from across the state. And this is an interactive map. So if you just want to see like what's been mapped and reported near you already, you can access this map and zoom into your area. This graph just shows the number of reports submitted over time. Right below the graph is the legend, which shows all of the species. And this is just a screenshot, but when you see it live, you can scroll to the sides. You can select species by their DNR classification. You can select a subset of species by their common names. So maybe you wanted to see where some of those common species that Asa talked about have been mapped. Maybe you want to see like, have people mapped honeysuckle and buckthorn and barberry near me. You could select those species from the common name drop-down menu, and the map will update to show you that information. So when you report species with the app or on the website, all of that information goes directly into this map. So this is actually one of the easiest ways to get a map of the species that you have reported. And to get to this map, you'll go back to that WIFTIN homepage and then click on our Tools tab, and you'll see a link for the WISTIPP viewer there. And then there's a quick guide that will kind of explain how to use some of the features of the map. Now, the other thing with invasive species, Asa didn't talk about this, Kelly might, but we have over 140 plants alone that are regulated as invasive in the state of Wisconsin. And so as a landowner or volunteer, or even for those of us who deal with invasive plants professionally, like that is a huge number of species to keep track of. And so it's really hard to figure out, you know, when should you be looking for some of these species. And so we made this invasive species calendar, and each row is a species, each column is a month of the year going from January to December. And so you'll see for each month, there's a circle that has a color, and then it's like filled in or not filled in. So the color of the circle just tells you what the dominant life stage is of that plant during that month. And then how filled in the circle is what we call the detectability. So basically, how easy is it to spot that species in that given month? So if we look down at garlic mustard, which is the 4th species down, we'll see that, you know, April through July typically are the best months to look for that when it's flowering and when it has its seed pods on it. But as it goes dormant or starts kind of drying out for the year, it becomes harder to find. And so this is another interactive tool. You can basically create a custom list of species to look for based on the habitat that you have, or maybe you only want to see things that are highly detectable in the month of September and October, because we're kind of starting to straddle those months now. The chart will update with whatever parameters you select with the drop-down menus. So just like the map, this one you can also find in the tools section of our WISTIPP website. So I'll check and see if there's any questions related to mapping, but I just want to point out that just like Asa mentioned for our SISMAs, including CWIP, here at WISTIPP, we're here to help you identify what plants you have, help you figure out how you're going to manage them. So I know we've got a lot of management questions coming in, so we're another resource. We're happy to help you kind of get going on a plan for dealing with some of these invasives on your property. So we'll check the questions really quick. So somebody asked about, Kristen said that they've uploaded reports with just a pinpoint because they didn't know how to use the polygon, and then use the comment box in the reporting form to add the information about the size. And Kristen's wondering if they can upload a new report of the same site but using the polygon. So Kristen, actually the best way to deal with this is to go log into the EDDMapS website, and it's the same login information you would use for the app and the website, so that email and password that you set up, and then click on My EDDMapS, and then it would actually be easiest to edit your report. So go to that original report you made with the point and then draw the polygon. And Kristen, my email is up on the screen right now, so definitely feel free to email me if you want more specific instructions. I'm happy to help you out with that. And then we'll just see. I don't think there are any more questions in the chat box either. So I'm going to send it back over to Asa, and then we'll keep looking at that Q&A box to see if there are any more coming in.
Thank you, Anne, for your presentation. Turn my video back on. Thank you so much. It was great. I'm sure a lot of that information is super helpful for everybody interested in invasives and mapping, and especially the resources. There was one person who had asked earlier about finding invasive plants that are already on their property, and I shared a link to the WISTIPP viewer. So I think you should be able to find that in the Q&A for folks. There's one other question that got a little bit buried. How do you feel about apps like Seek for identifying plants? Do you find they're usually accurate? I use the iNaturalist app, and I sometimes use it to help me find plant IDs. And I think that sometimes it's accurate and sometimes it's not at all. I think it's a good resource, just like anything else, to help you determine things, but it might not always get you all the way there.
Yeah, and Asa, if I can just jump in that. So the Seek app is made by the iNaturalist people, and I would say of the plant ID apps that I've either heard about or experienced, I think that's the most accurate. But I agree with Asa. It can get you kind of close, but it's always good to verify maybe with a local expert. So that could be any of us presenting, just to double check that it's the correct ID, especially if it's something that you're considering taking a management action on. You want to really make sure you know what you're dealing with before you start cutting things down, essentially.
And I'm just going to go through a little bit of these resources that we're putting up at the end of each presentation. This slide, which I assume everybody can see, has a bunch of websites that are really good resources if you're looking at learning more about invasive plants, and especially if you're looking at control. In particular for control, I recommend looking at the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, MIPIN, which is the second bullet down. It'll have species-specific control info. You get to type in your species and learn about all different kind of tactics to control it. And also the WISTIPP website, the Wisconsin First Chapter Network, which is Anne is the coordinator for that group. But they have fact sheets that have really great information about species-specific control measures and what herbicides work best and everything like that.